那哈德森讲的第二节啊，他讲的这个第二段呢，他就有意思。他说呢，经济学理论是如何不切合事实？他说这干脆就是说，这个经济学理论就是个政治宣传啊。他说其实就是意识形态，它只服务于资本主义崛起，就是特别是服务于西方列强崛起，他的需求。当他要控制你的时候，他让你接受他的理论。所以你们看这个事儿也有意思啊，就是这个介绍西方经济学的时候呢，这个哈德森教授是明确的把它当成政治宣传来表述的。说历史上工业国的真正富强的之道，依靠的是混合经济学，需要政府以低廉的价格来提供基础设施，而不是让它被私人垄断。那但是这个他们提出的经济理论呢，却实际上是与他们自己的经验背道而驰的。每当你看到一套经济学理论，你就得问谁会从中受益，也就是这个经济学理论是为谁的利益写的。比如说他解释古典政治经济学，注意哈，他说的是古典政治经济学。那他讲自由市场与社会主义的关系，所以他在理论上呢，其实很大程度上是具有很强批判性的。在过去的5000年里，每个国家都出现强大的政府与富裕地主阶级及债权人之间的斗争，而后者，也就是这些吃租的啊，收那个债务利息的这些人，他们是不生产的，所以它并不能有利于产业的发展。那他们形成的利益集团总是尽可能的把所有的盈余占为己有，于是说他们对这个社会进步是反动的。所以哈德森教授讲，这是政治经济学要讨论的内容。这些呢，也是产业资本要发展的自由市场经济，相对而言最要批判的那个内容。也就是说，你如果是允许实力阶层、允许吃租阶级成为主要的利益获取者，那你的产业经济是不得发展的。那在这个道理上呢，我觉得他讲的是比较直白的，这其实也是个简单的道理。
I began to teach all this in 1969 in New York, and the lectures that I gave in trade, development, and foreign debt have been published in China in 2012. So my lecture theories there. And at the very outset of teaching, I'd worked on Wall Street for 10 years, and I was invited. Someone said, "Why don't you begin to teach?" I thought, well, that's a nice idea. But I had a problem in teaching. They showed me all the textbooks for international trade theory. If I taught the trade theory that was in the textbooks, it was not realistic. But if I taught the students how trade and investment actually work today, then it's going to be the opposite of the textbook models. What was I going to do? Was I going to teach reality or textbooks? Well, the way to get promoted in the United States from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor is to teach what's in the textbook and everybody else. So I decided, well, I can always go back to Wall Street. I'm going to read what they say in the textbooks. I actually had not read any textbooks in trade theory. I did have a PhD in economics, but they never talked about trade theory because, quite frankly, it's so silly. What foreign students are taught in the United States is so silly that none of my friends even wanted to go near it. But I thought, well, let's see what the textbooks say. And it was an unrealistic attempt to justify free trade. In fact, almost all economic theory in the textbook is an advertisement. And it's an advertisement for a political theory. Its objective is not to describe how Britain and the United States and Germany industrialized and gained world leadership. It's the policy that they wanted other countries to follow. So that they wanted other countries to be dependent on their leadership. So their economic theory was telling other countries, don't do what we did, do what we say. Be dependent on us. You should produce agriculture, food, raw materials, and let us produce your industrialization. That's the international specialization of labor, and everybody gains. And when Ricardo in 1817 drew up his trade theory and theory of economic rent, the classical economics is largely based on, he had Portugal, and Portugal was a big gainer. And in his mathematical model, it wasn't really a statistical model. It was like other mathematical models, they're fake. When people use mathematics to describe an idea, especially if it's very complicated mathematics, and they're not using actual statistics, you can be sure that they're trying to put something over on you. They're saying, don't look at reality, look at the model. And if you can just distract their attention to a kind of parallel universe, all of a sudden you're not studying economics anymore. You're in the literature department. You're studying science fiction about a parallel universe. And that's basically what students are taught in the United States, which is why almost all of my better students at the New School, they've gone through the master's degree, many of them through a PhD degree. They said, we don't want to be economists. This is silly. Why would we want to do this? This isn't reality. We're going to be realistic. They went on to work on Wall Street. They went into, one of them raised horses. They just dropped out of the field because the field is really an unrealistic field. So if you accept the kind of free trade propaganda that you get in the textbooks, you're led to a hypothetical world that Nobel Prizes are given to try to convince people that that's economic science. But it's not economic science. It's religion. It's superstition. It's the idea that you can get rich by not having the government play any role at all. Well, every country from England, America, Germany, Europe, every country's getting rich the same way that China is getting rich today. It's a mixed economy. You need the government to provide the infrastructure at a low price and not let it be monopolized. You need a government strong enough to prevent a landlord class from emerging. And the great challenge to China today is, in the past, looked to America and said, well, we want to be like America. That's what Russia thought. How do we be like America? Well, let's ask the Americans how to get rich. And the Americans told the Russians, well, first of all, you take all the raw materials, all of your oil and gas, all of your nickel and diamonds and electric utilities, and you just give them to an individual, let him give it to him free, let him issue stocks, and he'll sell the stocks in New York, and he'll get rich in no time, because if you let us buy into these companies, we'll bid up your stocks, because now we're going to get all the money from your land and real estate, from your oil and gas, from your electric utility. We'll get them in the financial class, and Russia won't get them. And of course, you'll be very poor, but the kleptocrats, the people who give themselves the oil and gas wells in their own name, the electric utilities in their own name, they will get so rich that your GDP will actually go up, even though 99% of the population is getting poor. Well, the 1%, the Russia said, sounds good to us, and that's just what they did. It's not what China did. China did not play by the textbook theory. And economic history teaches the opposite of what textbooks teach, which is why in the United States, they don't teach economic history anymore as part of economics. If you look at history, all of a sudden you're going to say, wait a minute, the world doesn't work that way. They don't teach history, and they don't even teach the history of economic thought. Because if you teach a history of how economic thought actually begun, you find that it was exactly the opposite in the 19th century of what we have today. The Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, Ricardo, they were talking about the economics of industrial capitalism and how to industrialize the country and get richer. Today's economy says how 1% can get richer by deindustrializing and making the economy poorer. So the question is, who are you going to believe, the textbooks or economic history? I think whenever you're given an economic theory, you need to ask who benefits. Any economic theory is going to benefit one class or one nation relative to other classes and nations. And today's mainstream economics, as I said, is propaganda for finance capitalism. It's what's taught is whatever is in the United States' national interest in its role as the world's most financialized economy. So its logic rejects that of industrial capitalism, and that's why you don't study classical economics anymore. And classical political economy seemed to be moving not towards the kind of free market we have today, but towards socialism. It had, from Adam Smith to Ricardo, John Stuart Mill to Marx, to Thorstein Veblen, all of the classical economists had one common denominator. They advocated that you have to tax the land rent to prevent a landlord class from getting privilege, that any country's taxes should be on land rent, because if you don't tax the land rent, everybody wants housing. As population increases, as the economy gets richer, as cities build sewers and infrastructure and transportation and parks and museums, obviously the rental value of any house is going to go up. Now, left to bankers, it's not taxed, then people are going to have to borrow more and more money. And the banker is going to end up with all the rent. And the bankers today are in the same position that British landlord class and Europe's landlord class was in the past. But if the government taxes away the land rent, then housing prices are going to be kept down. I'm going to discuss this more in chapter 4, which is going to be all about land and real estate and food. But I just want to give a heads up now to say that this is the center of classical value theory. And to explain what rent is, they developed value and price theory. The value of any product, of any house, any company, was the cost of production. It was the cost of labor, and it was the cost of labor that was needed to make the capital goods and the raw materials and everything that went into production. But prices often were higher than this value. And what was higher was something that didn't have any cost counterpart in the cost of production. It was something that was for free. Nature produces the land for free. The land is there. The question is, who's going to get the value of the rising housing valuation? Will it be the government, in which case you can own the house? And I think ever since 5,000 years ago, everybody wants to have their own house. They want to own their own house. The question is, if their house gets more valuable, they're supposed to at least earn enough money to pay the carrying charges, to pay the rent. Now, if the government collects this increased value, then the increased value, people will pay just what they're paying now, but it'll go to pay the government. But if the government doesn't collect this increased value, then the bankers are going to lend it to somebody to buy, and the bankers are going to get it. So the question is, who do you want to be the beneficiary of prosperity? Do you want a class that doesn't create value, that gets a free lunch to get rich, or and it's going to use its wealth to get richer and richer and taking more and more public enterprise away from the government? Or do you want the government basically to get its taxes from the free lunch? The classical economist said, you really shouldn't tax labor, because if you tax workers, then their employers are going to have to pay them enough money to pay the taxes. In the United States, a worker has to right away get 15% of the salary set aside to pay for retirement, Social Security, and medical care when they're older. And they also have about up to 20 to 30% of their wage set aside to pay taxes. Now, the classical economists would say none of this should be taken off. The retirement should be paid out of what the economy produces once you reach retirement age. You don't have to save before you retire, because if you save, you give it to a banker, the banker lends it to somebody who borrows to buy a corporation, fire the labor, downsize the company, and move the company to China. That may be good for China temporarily, but it wasn't very good for the United States, and that's what the last election here was all about. So the question is, who is going to get the economic surplus, and what are they going to be used for? Well, by the end of the 19th century, almost every country in Europe and the United States especially the business schools, said we need government to play a rising role in society. We need to prevent a wealthy landlord class from developing. That was feudalism. We want to get rid of feudalism. We want to get rid of a hereditary class where people get rich by inheriting a trust fund, inheriting property, not having to work for themselves. Everybody should have to work for themselves, and we want equality of opportunity. And that takes the government strong enough to prevent a wealthy class from developing. This same question, by the way, went way back to the Byzantine Empire. It went way back to Greece and Rome. It went back to Mesopotamia. Every country for the last 5,000 years has had a fight between a strong government and a wealthy class of landlords and creditors that try to emerge and take all of the economic surplus for themselves. So by the late 19th century, everybody agreed that the world was moving towards socialism of one kind or another. There was Christian socialism, there was Ricardian socialism, taking the land rent and privileged income. There was Marxian socialism. There was even libertarian anarchist socialism. Then came, all this changed in World War I.
我们之所以国内有这么大的阻力，比如像哈德森这种也是美国教授，但他的东西我们在国内见到的很少。我们国内的大量的教科书，特别是高等院校，人们都是把庸俗经济学，西方经济学本来叫庸俗经济学啊。我们从90年代以后，才逐渐把西方的所以以微观研究为主要研究内容的庸俗经济学，当成今天普遍适用的所谓普适性，当成这种所谓真理。恰恰没有人像哈德森这么直白的告诉你，这就是意识形态，这就是宣传工具。就从这个角度来说呢，我倒是觉得这个他的很多分析很有意思。他是认为这个就是你们中国幸亏是没有按照这套新自由主义的理论来去实际操作。那么你们幸亏不是这样，如果你们是这样，你们恐怕也早就受到巨大的这个影响甚至巨大的打击，甚至早就出现严重问题了。这一点呢，倒是我觉得说的，他尽管他没有在中国生活过但他说的呢，却和中国的实际情况有很大的相似性。打个比方，我们尽管从80年代开始引入，但是真正全盘的接受西方经济学，特别是新自由主义经济学的这些理论呢，却是在90年代以后，尤其是在90年代的后期以后。那也就是说，70年代以来，当我们开始接受外资，开始改造中国的经济结构的时候呢，我们并没有完全按照西方经济学的理论来操作我们的政策，尤其是在政策界。那个时候呢，大多数还都是以这个马克思主义政治经济学为主要的理论工具的。一直到90年代外国资本全撤，这时候呢，我们为了能够进一步吸纳外国资本，做了一系列的改变。这个过程中那在经济理论上也基本上是开始了一个全面照搬西方新自由主义经济学的这样一个过程。但这比较晚，如果我们开头就这么干，那恐怕就像这个苏联的改革一开头就是按照西方的这个所谓新自由主义的教科书理论来制定了一套所谓500天计划，比如说它很快就垮掉了。如果我们开头不是这样，我们一直坚持了大概差不多20年左右的时间，不是这种做法，所以我们可能比这个就相对来讲比较稳当了一点。那到90年代后期，我们开始照着西方经济学去转变我们自己的经济思想的时候呢，又正好赶上1997年的东亚金融风暴，然后2001年的美国新经济崩溃的危机，然后又赶上2007年美国次贷危机，2008年的美国金融海啸，是他们的新自由主义经济出了严重的问题，给了我们很多教训，使得尽管我们在经济理论界已经全盘美国化了，但是在政策界却因这些教训不断发生，而不敢轻易的在思想上完全师从以美国为中心的这种西方中心主义思想的这个体系了。所以实事求是，这个在哈德森他这个讲课的介绍中呢是特别强调的。我希望大家也比较辩证的、客观的看我们是怎么走过来的。